Welcome to Bruce Hurwitz Presents Meet the Experts. I'm your host, Bruce Hurwitz of Hurwitz Strategic Staffing. You can find us on the web at hsstaffing.com. I hope you'll consider us for all your staffing, career counseling, and professional writing needs. Momentarily, I will be joined by Dr. Eric Maisel. We'll be discussing parents who bully. Meet the Experts is sponsored by P&K CPAs. P&K is a full-service accounting firm. They provide accounting and consulting services to businesses ranging from startups to small and mid-cap companies to nonprofits, as well as high net worth individuals. Contact them today for a free consultation at info@pk-cpas.com or call them at 973-882-8810. They will be happy to be of service. Eric, welcome to the show.
Hi, Bruce. It's wonderful to be with you.
It is my pleasure, sir. Please take a moment or two and introduce yourself to our viewers.
Sure. My name is Eric Maisel. I have a variety of interests. I've done 50 or 60 books on a variety of subjects. I used to work as a psychotherapist, and now I've been working for the last 30 or so years as a creativity coach. My special interests are the creative life, creative individuals, life purpose, meaning, mental health. And I'm the lead editor for the Ethics International Press Critical Psychology and Critical Psychiatry series, where we look at issues of critical psychology. We look at the DSM and the extent to which the mental disorder paradigm works or doesn't work.
What's the connection between creativity and bullying, if any?
I'm not sure there's a direct creativity, except that a direct connection, except that in childhood, when we are bullied, we go find our individual resources. And for some kids, it's going off and reading or painting or going to the movies. It's those places of love, those pure places of love in childhood and places of safety. So I'm not sure that there's a direct connection, but lots of my clients were bullied in childhood. So I don't want to make a false connection, but those are the stories they tell me.
Just curious. The number of years ago, in a previous life, I was a fundraiser, and I was hired to write a capital campaign for write a grant for a capital campaign for a public library. And the librarian asked me what the library's most important function was. So I gave the obvious answer. And she said, no, we are a safe haven for children who are bullied.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? And the number one finding, to call it a finding, that I get from my research and from clients is that the only thing that really works to deal with a bullying parent, an authoritarian parent, is physical distance. It's about the only thing that works. As an adult, that often means needing to move 3,000 miles, but as a child, that can mean getting to a library, to a safe space like a library. And the books, of course, are wonderful there, but the safety of it is doubly wonderful.
Now, when I was a fundraiser, I started a program for elder abuse, obviously to help victims of elder abuse. And you laugh, but we once had a sign on the door that said spousal abuse workshop and the room number. And when I got there, I looked at it and I said, somebody is going to come in. And sure enough, there was an elderly gentleman behind me. And I went into the social service department and I said, you're going to think I'm crazy. And this gentleman said, excuse me, I have a question. And he wasn't trying to be funny. Are you teaching husbands how to beat their wives?
Mm-hmm.
And so we changed the sign.
Exactly.
In all seriousness, I learned things about elder abuse that I had no, and it just shocked me.
And they're pretty harrowing, aren't they?
To
That's
put
what
mildly.
I think a third or a half the book are the stories of people who've been bullied by authoritarian parents, and
This isn't parents. This is children. This is children abusing.
oh, no, understood. But the only place I meant to go to is how harrowing these stories are, whether it's elders or children or adults. These are not mild problems that they're facing. These are tremendously traumatic events in their lives.
Now, I was bullied. I was bullied in school. I learned how to deal with the bullies by confronting them, not physically, but simply by embarrassing them.
Hmm.
I would humiliate them, and I got good at it and I enjoyed it. And then
Hmm.
finally, somebody said to them, "You better leave the guy alone." And, it took years. I had to grow up a little bit. But if we're talking about bullying parents,
Hmm.
you it's a different dynamic
Yep,
because you can't run home to your parents and say you're being bullied in school.
that's exactly right. So one of the tactics that I suggest or that clients have explained to me is the idea of finding allies in the family. It may not be that you can turn to your mother or your father, but maybe there is an aunt or a grandmother or a sibling or somebody that you can at least speak to about it. It's not that they necessarily can help all that much, but part of the challenge for the child is not even believing your own truth, not even being certain that this is really happening to you. So at least you can find, let's call them psychological allies, folks you can talk to who say, yeah, that really was mean of your dad. That was really not okay. That's not a complete answer to the problem, but it's at least something to look for those kinds of allies in the family.
We've been talking about it, but I think I should have you define it. What is bullying?
The way I come at it is that it's an aspect of the authoritarian personality. The authoritarian personality was an idea sort of put together, promulgated in the 1950s, primarily at the University of California in Berkeley by Adorno and other researchers who were curious about who Hitler's followers were. That was the energy behind writing about the authoritarian personality back then. They were interested in the social construct of authoritarians in the political sense, but they didn't tackle the idea of authoritarians in the private sense or in the family that much. For me, bullying is a feature of the authoritarian personality. That is a personality that wants to punish, that wants to humiliate. Bullying is just one face of this person's personality. There's a narcissistic piece, there's an aggressive piece. But I think that the main thing is that this person wants to punish. And if we want to define bullying simply, it's the activity of one person desiring to punish another person and following through and being very clever at that punishing. There's a cleverness there too. One of the features of this bullying is the parent sets up rules and then breaks them himself or herself, but the kids have to follow them. Quixotic rules, rules that change without you being told that they've changed. Anything to be done to keep you off balance. It's a kind of intrusiveness too. So there are lots of features to the bullying, but the package is the authoritarian personality in a family setting.
Is it a general rule of thumb that bullies bully? That people who were, no, that's wrong. That people who were bullied are the ones who are now bullying.
Well, they typically don't come to me. So I think the answer is probably not exclusively. I don't know if it's typical, but not exclusive because my clients do not typically themselves bully. They had the experience of being bullied, but they didn't go on to bully. No doubt, lots and lots of kids of bullies go on to bully, but it can't be exclusive because I know the other side of that.
Now, you said something about physical distance,
Yep.
and that brings me back to our elder abuse program. We thought we had a great program. We were located in a building kitty corner across from a hospital, directly across the street from a police precinct. There was a caretaker in the facility all night. Doors were all locked. We had set up apartments, kind of dormitory style. There wasn't, there weren't private bathrooms or kitchens. I don't remember if there was a sink in the room, but there were bathrooms and there were sinks and there was a cafeteria. And during the day, we had a senior center, and it was a well-kept building. It was very nice. It was very safe. And we couldn't get an abused elder to leave their home no matter what we did. We showed them the facility. They said, no, I can't leave home. What happens if, and they came up with 1,001 different excuses. They, better the devil you know, they wouldn't leave. And we had to change I had to go to all the funders and say to them, look, these people are not willing to leave their homes. They're not willing to come into the shelter. And we've got to change the focus from residency to counseling. And there was no problem.
Exactly.
Is it now when a child is bullied by a parent, how do you get them out of the house?
You can't really get them out of the house. I mean, we understand that separating kids from parents is a drastic solution and has its own consequences. So I don't think it's exactly necessarily getting them out of the house. It's helping them try to speak their own truth, whether it's to teachers or to allies in the family or to the parents themselves. That's one sort of thing. Trusting their own truth and also trying to create some psychological distance in the middle of it all. And that's what each of us has to do in life anyway. If things are going on, the circumstances are difficult, we have to find our way of living our life as best we can by creating some psychological distance. So to say that more simply, what you just said feels true, and that is that we're not going to provide them with physical distance. So maybe the best we can do is offer them counseling or coaching, some coping skills, some things that they can try to do till they can actually get out of the house as either an adult or an emancipated adult or somewhere down the line. If we're talking about the adult children, and most of the people I'm working with are the adult children of bullying parents, not the young children of bullying parents, they really do find that physical distance is the answer. And things that are like physical distance, like not feeling compelled to go to Thanksgiving dinner, or not feeling even compelled to take care of their elderly parents who often parents mellow a little, in their 60s, 70s, 80s, they're a little too frail to bully, but they still have a way of bullying. But they can still be psychologically bullying, even if they no longer can push the kids around. But just as you were saying about elders, my clients feel guilty about not taking care of their parents or not seeing their parents, even though the interaction is always bad, and they always come away like losing the next 2 weeks of their life to reliving the experience of Thanksgiving dinner or whatever it was, even though they know better, so to speak, they just feel guilty about making that separation. So I think one of the places we can help is giving people permission, giving adult children of bullies permission to not deal with their parents anymore, to not feel guilty about not dealing with their parents.
I had that in a totally different context with some friends, and we got them not to go. It wasn't Thanksgiving, it was Passover. And the
It's hard
first
to do
year
is
they didn't go. I mean, it's the
yeah,
proper comparison by
right.
holidays. Technically, it's obviously Passover and Easter, but no, for all intents and purposes, it's Passover and Thanksgiving.
It feels like one of
Year,
those obligatory things that are so hard to pass on. Yep.
the first time, it was absolute, no other word for it, hell for them.
Hmm.
And they had a guilty, it was as though they were going through the stages of mourning. And then I said to them, and this happened a few times,
Yep.
how do you feel now? This was like a week after the holiday, 2 weeks after that. I'm not stressed. Last year, how did you feel? I was stressed. And
Yep.
then the next year, it was a lot easier, and then it just ended. But you reminded me of something else. When I lived in Israel, for all intents and purposes, I ran a very small, I don't want to blow this out of proportion, a mental health center for children with interpersonal communication problems. And the children were what we called the identified patients,
Yep.
meaning that the real problem was their parents, and the children had an issue, but the parents were blowing it out, were making it greater than it had to be.
Yep.
In the case of bullying, obviously the child, whether young or adult, is the victim. And in my terminology, if you will, the identified patient.
Yep.
But it's the parents who are the problem. How do you get the parents into treatment, for lack of a better word?
You don't. This is behind closed doors. These things happen behind closed doors, and that's why I think it's, to use one kind of way of saying it, a silent epidemic. I don't think you can get parents into treatment, and I don't think we see the children in treatment necessarily either from the bullying. It'll get renamed something else. It'll be a, a learning disability or something that's going on at school, or an ADHD or something, pediatric depression, or it's going to have some kind of label. The kid, as you say, the kid will have the problem. The kid will be the identified patient. The kid will be treated now more often than not with chemicals, and it'll start to edge into the biochemical medical model place that the child has an affliction that can be treated with chemicals, and the parents will get off scot-free.
Every time I need it, I forget it. I was running a summer camp, and I had never run a summer camp before. So my approach was to go to everyone who had worked in the summer camp and had a wealth of experience that I didn't have, and say, look, the first thing I want you to know is I don't know what I'm doing. So I'm relying on you. Tell me what it is that you need. And when I got to the nurse, she said she didn't want to administer any prescription drugs. She didn't want to hold on to any prescription drugs. There is a drug, you'll know it begins with a D, that is given to children with ADHD. You know what it is? Starts with a D. It's going to drive me crazy. No, with an R, Ritalin.
Ritalin. There you go. That's why I was having trouble with the
Yeah,
D.
Ritalin. Yeah. Um,
Yep.
and she said, camps are just jokingly referred to as Camp Ritalin. I said, okay, explain to me about the drug. She explained it to me. I asked her how many children were taking it. She said, last time there were 30 and they're all back. And I said,
Yep.
okay, we'll send out a notice to the parents that we're not going to be administering Ritalin or any other prescription drug. And if the child needs it, the parents will have to come and administer it themselves.
Yep.
Out of the 30 children, out of the 30 children, not a single parent showed up. There
Yep.
wasn't a problem with a single child. They didn't need the
Nope.
medication. Are children being over-medicated?
100%. It's beyond over-medicated. It's that this is actually a labeling process and not a diagnostic process. There isn't real diagnosing going on in the way in which diagnosing is meant or used in a medical context. So it's deeper than the drugs shouldn't be used. It's that the whole enterprise needs to be looked at with some genuine skepticism as to whether something like ADHD even really exists. One of the funny things about ADHD, you may know of it in the DSM and in other diagnostic literature. One of the clues that a child has ADHD is that the child doesn't show it when you meet the kid. If you're a therapist, the child is not demonstrating it, therefore the child has it. It sounds Alice in Wonderland, but that's used as part of the criteria for diagnosing ADHD, is that you can't see it when you're meeting the child, which should alert us to the possibility that it's not about the child, but it's about what's going on in the home, but also at school. The most robust finding about ADHD is that the youngest kids in a class, in any given class, will be the most diagnosed with ADHD, namely, maybe a developmental thing, that they're a little less mature, they're a little more immature than the other kids in their class. That's not ADHD, that's just being a year younger than the kids around you. So there's a lot to be said about this, but the headline is, are they being over-medicated? Absolutely.
A question for you about the DSM. Years ago, I'm asked to write on a plethora of topics, and someone asked me to do some research on homosexuality. And I chuckled and he asked me why. And I said, well, I had just been reading Freud for the first time. And Freud writes in passing, I had a client who was homosexual, blah, 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 blah. And then he talked about the treatment or whatever. And that was the first time that I have ever heard of homosexuality being a psychiatric disorder.
Right. Yep.
And then as I researched it, and I don't remember the dates, but in late 1970s, homosexuality was removed from the DSM by the American Psychology Association,
Psychiatric Association.
Psychiatric Association, and then in the 1990s by the World Health Organization. And this
Exactly.
was done by vote.
Guys sitting around a table.
Yeah. I don't get that.
You shouldn't get it. You shouldn't be able to get it. The DSM is a shopping catalog for therapists. It's not a real diagnostic manual. There's a couple of the proofs that it's not a real diagnostic
What
manual
does
is the
DSM stand for?
Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of the American Psychiatric Association,
Thank you.
what it stands for. And it's silent on causation and silent on treatment. And that should, if you're a thinking person, that should make you go, how can it be silent on causation and silent on treatment? If it's silent on those two things, what's it about? And what's it about is collecting what's called symptom pictures, collecting symptoms and putting them together. Some guys sitting around a table saying, let's put this with that, with this, with that, and let's call it bipolar disorder. Let's call eating a lot and being tired and a few other things, let's call that bipolar disorder. There's no logic there. There's no reason why those things ought to go together. It's not like there's an underlying X. There's no underlying X known to humankind. And there's no reason why we should suppose that hating your job or hating your marriage should be treatable with a chemical. It kind of just doesn't make sense. So there's lots to be said about what I think is the illegitimacy of the DSM and the ICD, where it speaks to the International Classification of Diseases. It too follows the same rubric of symptom pictures rather than causation and treatment. It ought to be about causation and treatment. You have cancer and here's the treatment, but it's not about that. It's about a certain kind of labeling process.
I don't remember what I wrote. It was a long time ago, but something tells me it would have been better if we had spoken back then. In any event, I am going to share your contact information with our viewers, and I have one final question for you. Is there anything I did not ask you which you wish I had asked you? And if I had asked you, what would you have said?
No, I think you've asked me every single thing a human being could possibly have asked me, and I think they were wonderfully answered, and I think we are good.
Well, you're a gracious liar, and I thank you profusely. You've provided us with important information, and on behalf of our viewers, I thank you.
Thank you so much, Bruce.
I'm Bruce Hurwitz. Thank you for watching, and as always, please stay focused on success.